All right. We are now recording. Let me change gallery view here.
And we just started setting this up like 30 seconds ago. It just kind of magically
right.
happens this way. With
Yeah.
it takes no effort to be this good.
Video conferencing is still easy as it's ever been. New problems. So we use OBS to do the stream, and for people who are watching, and we do the actual conference on Zoom, and then we use OBS to capture it and stream it out to Twitch, and we actually record on both Twitch and on Zoom. And every single time something goes wrong with one of those components, we're going to have to come up with a better solution so that we don't have to fight this in the future. But usually the Zoom audio comes out pretty nice, and we'll, if that's the better of the two, that's the recording that we'll put up later today on YouTube. So with that disclaimer out of the way, welcome to our stream. This is the NRE live stream, Network Reliability Engineering. I am your host, Cloud Toad. It is October 7th, 2019. And we have on the show with us today, of course, our co-host, Matt Oswald, and the infamous Ethereal Mind, Greg Ferro.
Hey guys, how's it going? Long time no speak, really. Have you been working hard on something?
I think so. I think we've been, yeah, I think we have been.
There was a time when we would meet each other at conferences endlessly somewhere in bars and drink way too much and talk about stuff. And now we don't. Life is sad, isn't it?
Yeah, it is sad. It's unfair. Yeah.
It is, yes.
But it's good. It's good to have work. This project is crazy. I mean, there's a never-ending amount of things to do with this project, and both technical and from a community perspective. And the community thing is new to me, so it's
it's not like a Python library where you just like everything's very well defined. It's like this is the functionality you need to make, and everybody's kind of working on the same like specific thing. It's a crazy diverse project. Like you could have 5 separate full-time jobs worth of content to work on. So
that's a startup. So that's the lesson that we learned from Packet Pushers when we started that all those years ago, was that the business could run when we weren't focused on it. Like I had a full-time job doing network architecture and network strategy for companies. And then I started traveling around the place to be an influencer, and then the podcast, and eventually I was doing too many different things and I started to come unstuck. And it wasn't until I took the decision to focus on just one thing, on Packet Pushers in the end. But it took a long time to get to that place. It was only then that I started to become sane again. I was doing too many things and it was a problem. So, but that's a startup. Like you start off going in every direction, and then as time goes by, you start to focus down on the things that matter and the things that work. So I think, your project would be the same. You're starting to work out you start off thinking, I'm going to go down this path. And then you start to go, hang on, that's not what we need to go down this path. Is that something that you're seeing?
Derek, it's kind of funny. Like a lot of the folks that have shown interest, actually, we were thinking like, one of the biggest things that people would get driven to is like the NRE Labs curriculum is like network automation learning, which that's true to an extent, but we've actually had quite a few people get interested in like everything other than that. All of the stuff in the just very weird like use cases that we didn't even think of. So but I like your point about multitasking, because there's real science behind that. Like we humans love to think that we're good multitaskers, but we're just not. Like
we're terrible.
We can fake it for like short periods of time, but A, we're not actually doing it, and B, even faking it for that period of time ends up really hurting us mentally.
I think so I've been reading up on this a little bit. I think there's 2 things that we're really good at. One is that it's in the hindbrain. It's in the lizard brain, the one where you're out on the veldt looking across, and all of a sudden you see a movement and you know immediately that it's a lion without actually thinking about it, and you know to run the hell away, right? Because that lion is dangerous to you. And your ability to sense threats at a distance unconsciously is something that's there. But there's another part of the brain that I like to think of, which is the forebrain, which is the science brain or the technology brain. And that can't do fast pattern recognition. It can't just look at something and go, yeah. It's got to sit there and think about it. You've got to get a hammer out and forge the pathways through the neurons until you get it sorted out. And I think there's two different patterns of thinking going on. And the problem with multitasking is you can do this fast pattern recognition and convince yourself that you can multitask. And then all of a sudden you go like, actually, I just read 50 pages and none of it went in. I've got to go back and do it again. Yeah. So I think there's two things going on. You can fool yourself that you can multitask. And I think if I was a manager, doing something really easy like management, where really my goal is to do fast pattern recognition, have lots of direct reports, review spreadsheets and look at pretty pictures all day. That's not so hard. You don't have to do a lot of deep thinking so much. And so it's really easy just to let that hindbrain do the thinking for you and look for patterns and gut feel and all that sort of stuff. But it doesn't work so well for technology-centric thinking.
No, it doesn't. That's one of the things with technology in general is these systems are super complicated, and there's multiple components, and the components themselves can sometimes become complicated. So like just you're thinking about how each subsystem works so that you can get an idea of this end-to-end behavior through the whole system when all the components are dancing together to make the effect. And if you're just learning how to understand the system and understand how it works, then it's more of it's too much in the foreground, and you can't really think about it's hard enough to learn how each subcomponent's working than it is to know how they're all gonna what the effect is of having them all going together at once. And
any one of those subcomponents can break the entire system. It's like a direct link gearbox. All the gears plug into each other. You're not going to get power to the wheels unless all the gears are working exactly as promised. And again, this comes down to the difference between, I've got a big bee in my bonnet this week about the difference between business and technology, because everybody says technologists need to be business people. You need to speak to the business. I'm going like, no, I'm a technologist. That's what you hired me for. If you want me to be a manager, I'll be a manager. I'll be better at it than you, because I'm good at everything I do. And that's why I'm an engineer, because I'm good at stuff, right? So it's true. Like one of the interesting things about DevOps, and this plays into the whole automation, right? DevOps thing. The thing about DevOps is that what we effectively did was we went to the engineers and said, you have to know more about the business. You have to take more responsibility for the business. You have to take responsibility for your tool chains. You have to take responsibility for your workflow, and you have to make it fit the business. So what you've just done is told an engineer that you need to understand the business. And so the engineers go off and learn business, and now all of a sudden you don't need managers. Right? Because you're making your own decisions. You know what the business wants. You don't need a project manager. You don't need a scrum manager. You don't need an agile manager. And you don't need a business manager except for someone to interface to human resources and to do the budgets every quarter, and then you're done, right? That's what DevOps is getting rid of managers and replacing them with engineers. At least that's what I think it is. Yeah.
That's interesting. I never thought about it that way. I tend to think about DevOps from the bottom up. Like all the systems we use to deliver, we'll call it the platform, right? It's not just the network; it's everything, right? All those systems together. We buy all the individual components, and what we learned is that having them strictly siloed and depending entirely upon the vendor to do the integration or to do the design work or to do the troubleshooting within the ultimately that's who you escalate to in a lot of places is a really terrible idea. You end up with a system that's almost never up. It's always has a problem, right? There's almost something is broken in that chain, and DevOps was a lot about investing back in the idea of redundancy and resiliency and sort of getting away
taking ownership of your stuff, right? I made this, therefore I'm responsible for it. But the great part about working for normal companies with managers, it's not my problem. I just do what I'm told and then walk away, right? Poop it out, and then somebody else's problem, right? And DevOps is, and that's literally assuming that your staff are incompetent, right? The only reason we do it that way is because when we used to work on a factory floor 200 years ago, and they invented factory production, the point was that the people who were coming into the factory were not very skilled. They didn't have good training. They didn't have good knowledge, and everybody wants to put. Like a lot of the ITIL thinking and the Prince 2 and that sort of stuff is thinking that comes out of factories, like the Sigma 6, the Six Sigma, which comes out of Toyota in Japan. It was all designed for car production, right? And everybody had this exact job, and they would do that job for years and years until the production line was torn down, and then you could make things slightly more efficiently by getting the staff to do their jobs more perfectly, but really what they could do wasn't really defined by any more than what the production line could do. And there was no chance for creativity or individual thought or independent expression. And yet, as modern technologists and what we do in networking today, we're required to understand the business, creatively find solutions, work in a team, communicate sideways, up, down, understand the market that's around us and what we're seeing and who's doing what and, blah, 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 as well as take responsibility for all of that. Well, all of a sudden, your engineering changes. You're starting to use more of that fast pattern recognition stuff, and then you've still got to focus on things. That's where the multitasking comes unstuck, is because sometimes you're using the fast pattern and sometimes when you're using the focus. And that, I'm convinced of that, which is why I never leave this room. I'm always in here trying to think deep thoughts.
Wow. This is like,
I don't think the desired outcome for like, if you do look at some of the inspirations behind DevOps, like the Toyota Kata model and things like that, like obviously if you take that crazy literally, like you're not going to have a good time, because humans, to your point, humans are not factory components. Like there's definitely some wiggle room there. I think one of the most valuable things about that whole model is getting us to think in terms of outcomes, because we in technology are so bad at viewing our own day jobs and our own systems as subsystems of the greater whole. We're horrible at that. And I don't necessarily mean like the business for whatever that is, which that's not really a thing either, because everybody's the business. But like, you've gotta have a purpose for everything that you're doing. Otherwise, that there's gonna be a chance that what you do is not guided correctly.
That is a chance, but the thing is that for most of my career, that wasn't something that was my responsibility. I wasn't encouraged to understand. I was just told to do what I was told. I would have managers who would come to me with a piece of paper and a project and a scope of works, and my job was to do that. So I was not allowed to be creative or to participate in the business or to understand the purpose behind this. That happened, so far upstream in the sewage plant that by the time it got to me, there was no way I could understand what I was trying to achieve, right? And I still believe that a lot of this NetOps, DevOps, automation stuff comes in two parts. One, first of all, if you're automating, you have to understand the business purpose, and that's new. That's very new. And that's a hard skill to learn. The second part about the automation is that we have to learn to make our own tools. 10 years ago, we used to take the tools the vendor gave us, which was usually some CLI with some nominally consistent language of, a nominally consistent interface. And, that's like sending every carpenter out to build houses with a hammer and a chisel. Congratulations. And if you want to cut a piece of wood, make sure you use a chisel, because that's the only tool we're going to give you, And I think today we're seeing a much different sort of a thing where we're now saying with automation and this whole DevOps type of process, or NetOps type of process, I'm now allowed to invent the saw. Or like my grandfather, he was a carpenter when he was alive all those years ago, and he used to physically make his own tools. So he would go out and buy chisels and then get them custom made to a particular shape that he liked to use. Or if you were a woodsman 200 or 300 years ago out chopping down trees, it was actually standard for them to actually make the heads to exactly the way that they wanted to make them. Did you know there's like over 50 different axe heads? Mm-hmm. And the only reason that we all have exactly the same axe head, there's a short axe, a long axe, right? And there's two different sizes of axe head. The only reason we do that is because of mass production. We're given the same tool over and over. But years ago, when people were in a different era, everybody made an axe head that worked for their wood or their forest or their situation, or, maybe it wasn't even the right axe. And so much of what I see about automation these days is this flurry of invention around what is the right tool. Should I be Ansibling? Should I be terraforming? Should I be using, one of the frameworks? Which framework should I use? Maybe I should just be handwriting something in Python, whatever it is. And that to me is like a discovery of a 200-year-old process that we can actually have any tool we want.
And it sounds like your opinion is that's a net good, right? Like you're not saying that that's not. Are you saying that that's where we should be, or are you saying we should be in a different place than that?
I think there's two sides to this. Just because you can make your own tool doesn't mean you're going to make the best tool. Maybe you do. It's a bit like, the 1,000 monkeys on typewriters will eventually produce the works of Shakespeare. Sometimes the axes that they made in the 1600s weren't very good at all. But that might be because they didn't actually have enough metal. They might have, Did you know how hard it was to mine steel and iron back in the 16th century? it's just very difficult to get 250 grams of hardened steel in one place. Like making a sword was effectively, getting up towards the same price as gold, because finding that much iron and forging it was just so rare. You just couldn't find that much iron. Anyway, that's getting off the top. That was like the early days of automation. You just didn't have a choice of tools. There was only one. There's only a couple of tools that you had. I think that the challenge here is for most people, we would all use the same tool. And for most of us, we can all use the same tool because it's good enough. But for some specialists or for some specific use cases, it's better to make your own tool, but only if you know what you're doing, right? If you've educated, researched, thought about it, and you've got access to make different tools to get it wrong. So that's where we talk a lot of the time about what can you get wrong so that you can work out it's the wrong thing. So if you're in the 16th century and you design an axe head like, with 3 blades and and a whatever, that might be pretty dumb because you can't reforge that into something else very easily. So, that's not a very good metaphor, but I get you get the idea.
No, it's a great metaphor. I mean, this automation is not new. I mean, people have been as long since I've been around. We've been writing bash scripts and shell scripts to do stuff that automate things, even in the network, using tickle and expect. Not necessarily the right way, but we were doing those things. We were handcrafting that stuff back in the late 90s, right? So expect has been around forever.
We used to do it with Bay Networks, and back in the day, we used to do TCL and Perl the hell out of SNMP to program those routers in the day.
We did, actually. And I think, but because of DevOps, right, outside of networking, now there's been like intense focus on, well, how do we take that set of skills and apply it to networking? Because networks are not the same, right? You can have 1,000 servers. Well, those servers are not all interconnected and expected to exhibit a uniform cross-system behavior like the way a network is. You can't just make individual changes to a router and say, hey, look, I fixed this router. You could end up blowing up the rest of the network. So you have this, and also the network is a living thing, right? It's continuous. It never ever stops, and it never ends. And when you're making changes to it, you're altering a living thing that extends to all places in your organization. So we can't just straight up, lift and shift the stuff that people are doing with servers and apps directly on top of the network. There's something missing there, right? And so I think we're at a stage now in automation where we're taking tools like Ansible and Chef and Puppet and Terraform and all these. There's like a million of them, right? And we're trying to figure out what the right combination is. And I think until we have, I think there's yet to be a couple of tools that come out where that are going to plug some big holes for us, and then it'll be different going forward.
So I have opinions on this, if I may.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. So the fundamental belief that I have is that I don't see Ansible as a very long-term answer. I see Ansible as a short-term, and it covers over the gap between where we are and when we get to SDN platforms. Now, that doesn't mean that automation isn't going to happen. Automation will happen in 2 different ways. One is if you have an SDN platform like Contrail or Apstra's platform or Glueware or whatever it is, that's automation too, right? That's a different type of automation. It might be a chainsaw compared to using a handheld axe. Like I tend to think of Ansible as a handheld axe chopping down a tree, right? Maybe that's a bit, maybe even, maybe the CLI is an axe chopping down a tree, and maybe Ansible's a better axe, or it's a saw with 2 men on the other side. But over on the other side, what you really want is a chainsaw and just stand there and go, and the tree falls over and you're done, right? And I tend to think of SDN platforms in that sort of metaphor where I think you're much better doing automation against an SDN platform where you're doing a lot less work and the tool is doing a lot more work for you. Then I do think that in the long term, the idea of, using an axe or a saw with 2 men, on either side of it, pulling it backwards and forwards to chop down a tree, that's only going to be a short-term fix before you get to where you want to be, which is just, I don't want to be spending my life. Like I spent years trying to learn Perl and working out how to do SNMP and tickle scripts and doing stuff. And it was just enormously frustrating. And it's not something that I want to go back and do again. I have very little interest in learning Python or Ansible or Terraform or some other, artisanally crafted hand tool so that I can make a better wing wong. What I really want is just to go over and, do a Fonzie on the Coke machine and bugger me if the network's finished. That's really what I want, isn't it?
Matt, is that what we want?
I don't know. For me, like the analogy of finding another better tool to chop down the tree is important within a specific domain. I think you're correct when we talk about very specific aspects of network operations, but we tend to ignore 90% of what most folks do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, a lot of network engineers don't just touch one particular aspect of the network, and a lot of them don't even just touch the network. A lot of folks, to keep the analogy going, because that's what because we're just going to keep building on it until it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, we haven't kicked this horse to death yet.
It's like, sure, like we could have better tools to cut down that tree, but there's a bunch of leaves that need raked. There's a garden down the street that needs to get, weeds picked. There's just so many different tasks that, yeah, you can have a better tool to solve that one particular problem, but there's a breadth that needs to be addressed. And for me, that's why I like to talk less about automation within the scope of a single domain or a single activity, because I think you're actually right. Like within a specific domain, like take wireless as an example. Like you should not be writing your own wireless controller in Ansible or anything like that. Like you should let the PhDs in that field build products and abstractions, which everybody does in every discipline, and then use those abstractions to their best effect within that domain. That does not get you off the hook from stitching those domains together yourself in a way that's relevant to your own organization, which is very organization specific, by the way. Like that kind of stuff is not transferable. The way that your particular company does
the last mile. You're talking about the last mile, right?
Exactly right. And every organization has them. So
the 80-20 rule still applies, I think, is what you're saying. 80% of every network is identical to the other network. But the 80% of the problem is the 20% that's not done. Right?
Yeah.
Once you've got
if you think you're gonna focus on the 80%, then you're already off on the wrong path. You should focus on the 20%.
Yeah, by the time you've got a switch, and it's got an ASIC inside it and an operating system and APIs and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of that work's done for you as people who are rolling their own Linux operating system, for switches. Apparently you still need to be something of an expert, but it's still something that anybody can do with enough time and energy. A year or so, a typical engineer can come up to speed on Linux and carving your own Linux distro and getting the tools on it. But that's, who wants to sit around for a year and do that unless you're getting paid for it? You're not going to do that just for funsies. I guess my point would be is that my long-term view, say over a 5 to 10 year horizon, is that the long-term point of automation will be that you'll automate on top of an SDN controller, not writing your stuff directly against a device. Because the SDN controller will magnify your automation capabilities and present you with stuff at the end of the day. So now whether that's Contrail or SD-WAN, or Glueware with its pattern matching system, its intent-based sort of general type of templating engine, is neither here nor there. It's going to be a question of which one works for you and your situation. I take your point though, Derek. You're talking about the network is a federated system that always runs. We have to work on it while it's live, but it's also federated. Every device is codependent on the device next to it, and there's very little delinkaging or abstraction between them.
That's right. And that makes it really hard to do the right thing when you're automating. This is what I thought was one of the problems with SDN. I was very enthused, everyone was, when SDN came out, because it was like just a new way to think about things, right? That was outside of it was like we were in this claustrophobic space in networking forever. There was only one way to think about it. And so when this new way came out, it became, and I think Yvonne really led the charge on this when he was like, guys, it's way harder to do what it is you think you're going to do. Like, just look at BGP. It's not even a perfect protocol, but that thing has evolved over a very long time, over a lot of trial and error with a lot of very smart people to make that work. And the odds that you're going to rethink all of that and magically do it better than some of this is kind of a crazy thought. It's insane, because most people don't even know that, like, we have people who are experts in networking who have not a clue exactly. Look, I have a book on my shelf right here that has 48 pages written about ARP, the evolution of ARP. You would think that would be the simplest, dumbest thing in the world. That did not happen overnight. That took like 15 years for them to get right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I remember studying all those different ARPs, proxy ARPs, and
I haven't touched any of this stuff probably in 5 years, but I still can't throw it away. I have to display it prominently.
I just took all mine to the charity shop and ditched them all. Actually,
I'm getting there.
Something like yours. I just decided.
5 years.
Yeah. Well, I think I've had them through like 7 house moves, and I just went, time is up. I'm not, a lot of them are quite. Yeah. I think what you're saying is right, Derek. I think my point here is that part of what it is you need to strategize your automation path, right? And you need to know. Now, the tools like what NRE is giving us is really great, because it gives me these destinations that I can fire automation at. And that's a really useful tool. But you've got to need to know, this comes back to our original discussion about being the business or knowing the business. You've got to know why you're firing at it as part of the bigger piece. And so you can't just be an engineer anymore who's doing, an array slice through a Python array to try and get a bunch of data. That's a useful skill, but it's not the purpose. It's not the thing that gets you a pay rise. Getting a pay rise is that you were able to automate a thing and get your fellow colleague sacked so you can have his money in your pay packet instead of them. Right?
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry. Did I say that out loud?
I think that should have always been the case, though. I don't think this is new. I think if you at any point in your career have thought that you could get by just by being technical, even if you spend most of your time being technical, if you thought you could get away with not doing, like, I don't know, having a general idea of how your work is useful, I mean, that's just never been a lucrative position to be in my opinion.
So we've been doing a lot of work on packet pushes with SD-WAN, software defined WAN. And one of the stories, so we chat to people who are customers on shows, and we also chat to them when we go to conferences and stuff. And if there's one consistent theme that I've spoken to people who've done successful SD-WAN deployments, is they've done it even though their networking teams refuse to do it. Now, this is still an early adopter thing, right? It's changing now. But I remember talking to one guy who went down, he was the CIO, and he went down to his networking team and he said, we really need to look at this SD-WAN. And they went off and looked at it and came back and said, can't work. And he said, it can work, and we are going to do it. The business value is too compelling. We're going to pilot it. Are you going to do it? And they refused, because he said he was going to pilot vendor A, and they all said, we want to work on vendor B, and we refused to not work on vendor B, and vendor B is years away from having an SD-WAN strategy. So he went and hired 2 contractors. 6 months later, they had a pilot up, and then 6 months after that, a year in, they had 30 sites running. And these networking people have all been moved out of the door because they're no longer needed, right? And I've heard that story in various forms. It's roughly, that's the pattern. The CIO decides, or somebody who's an executive, got management responsibility, gets the business value of SD-WAN, and then basically just moves these people who refuse to let go of their legacy. Sorry, when I say legendary, I mean legacy. I like to try to be positive. I'm being upbeat. I'm trying to be, feel like I'm enabling all the people out there. So, when you've got your legendary CLI skills and that you've been using for, 5 years that you learned in your network professional classroom, you did like a whole week in a classroom, and then you spent a whole week reading a textbook to pass an exam, big effort, if you're not willing to let that go and move on, then you're actually going to be in a problem. So automation to me is a mindset as much as it is a, making axes or, using a power saw or a chainsaw to cut down a tree.
Well, this becomes like crazy evident to me. I can't tell you the number of times I've done a talk and somebody's come up to me afterwards. I think I've talked to Derek. Derek, I think you have the same experience often. And it's always the same question. In fact, I just gave a talk last week and this happened. And there's always the question at the end, what tool should I use for X? Like that's the the instinctive answer from a network engineer type who's been in the industry for a long time, and they're hearing about all this automation stuff, and so they want me, somebody who they feel like has the experience to just boil all of that down to one answer and say, like, use this tool. And I always tell them the same thing. I said, well, what are you trying to do? And I never tell them the name of a tool, because there are a billion, and they all have different criteria, and I can't that's not a learning experience that I can boil down for you. You have to go through that yourself. And I just don't think that we as an industry have learned that lesson en masse just yet, because we're so used to having the solution either told to us or just sort of in, the solution to problems just being handed down. And technology is a creative discipline. It has to be.
Yeah.
And we're not used to thinking of it that way.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say indirectly is I want you to go out and learn Python and Ansible and all the frameworks, right? But don't get overly attached to them, because my 30 years of networking has shown me told me very clearly, and my previous personal experiences with hard coding, is that you won't be doing it in 5 years' time. This is a transition we're going through, and you will write Python, and it will be a valuable learning experience for you. But in 5 years, you'll be working in some SDN platform and doing 80% of your work by pulling the lever on an SDN platform. And you might have still use your programming skills, but it'll be on top of the SDN platform.
Yeah,
I think it's
agree
more
with
like
that.
learning how to learn. That's the thing you should get.
That's the underlying lesson, but I'm also trying to give you a tactical strategy for a career plan.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that statement about automating against controllers is that boils down to the last mile bit we were talking about earlier. At some point, you have your own set of things that you're using, and you're not going to have one SD platform. Let's get rid of the N that covers every single thing: cloud, virtualization, storage, everything, all in one. Right? There's not going to be one thing that covers literally all of it. And I think if you're gonna be writing automations, it's gonna be against those high-level abstractions spread across those domains. And
it's a bit like what you see in a public cloud. You go in there and you configure a VPC. Okay, right? You might be automating a VPC, but what you didn't do was, fire up the MPLS underneath, create a VRF, check the BGP status.
Well, even within that's the thing. That's exactly the point. Like, even within a single public cloud. Just AWS. They have a billion services, and each of those services have their own APIs at different versions with different teams behind them.
That's right.
And even if you're just in AWS, which nobody is, but even if you're just in AWS, like, you still are on the hook for stitching those things together. There is still a last mile.
And that's as much work as you can reasonably achieve working for a company outside, right? You need a vendor to handle all the scut work underneath. I don't want to be watching Ansible modules or any of the other frameworks, logging in, logging out, and wondering whether they're working for this release of firmware anymore. My life's just too short. I'm getting older, and I'm getting a little tired of being in that rat wheel of just doing the same old, same problems day in day. It's getting quite disheartening to even consider that we would still be doing it. So I would like to think that people are thinking to themselves, yes, I definitely need Python. And like you said, Terraform or Ansible, and you're going to be doing something, but you're probably going to use some other tool like a chainsaw, that's powerful and does a lot of stuff for you and has as much power as you need and is built for the job that is at hand. And you need to bring that tool in as part of a toolbox of tools. So this might be your SD-WAN controller. I believe that, as the years go by, we're going to see one SDN controller just for the whole network. There won't be a Wi-Fi, campus, WAN, data center. It'll all just be one. It's already bundling up now. I don't know if you've looked at SD-WAN lately.
Well, we work for a company that does that already, so it's starting to do that. So yeah, it seems it'll be one interface, right? But there could be modules within that.
Well, what we're seeing with SD-WAN is like 5 years ago, we were talking about path dynamics, the ability to load balance across multiple paths at the same time. And now, 5 years later, I'm talking about to companies who have full-on operational security operations centers who sell SD-WAN. So the real feature is the security functionality, and they're doing content inspection, threat management, firewall. They're doing application identification through fingerprinting. They're doing automated threat response, and they're doing full-on active threat management. So if they detect something going on in the network, right, and that's SD-WAN now, that whole security function's just been folded into the branch network, and that blows my mind how quickly we've gone from routers like in 2014 when I was in New York.
A router with an
there,
ACL.
right?
That was your security.
And it was a router with an ACL. And then all of a sudden, one night, this company came up and showed us me SD-WAN. I was like, wow, my mind was going like this. 5 years later, we have companies folding all these security functions into it. And the SD-WAN that does path dynamics, that's basic features. That's like, and the weird part about this is that whole iteration has happened while there's people out there still doing OSPF in a branch network, right, on dedicated circuits. That whole iteration from path dynamics to zero-touch provisioning to cloud-based monitoring, analytics, unattended operations, and now all of a sudden includes all of the security stuff has all happened in 5 years. Just the pace of change. And and it's all bundled together. It's all glommed into a single glob, right? This isn't, the old days of security, firewalls were here and IDSs were here and content loggers were here and DNS is here and load balancers and blah, blah, blah. This is blop. It's a bundle, right? And you buy your SD-WAN and you get all of it, right? As standard features for certain products. And it's just...
and it's one of the things that people will have to, so I worked for a lot of places that had engineered workloads, meaning they knew exactly, like, here's a job and this job is going to use X amount of bandwidth and X amount of CPU and X amount of storage as it moves around and gets completed. And so there are some places that will probably retain dedicated circuits for, because of measured, performance on the millisecond scale. But there's already companies that do SD-WAN for dedicated circuits, multiple. Like you don't have to have, it's coming it's coming whatever the delivery mechanism is for your packets. This single sort of system image, single pane of glass management for WAN is going to happen no matter what.
Well, my point is that, and now what's happening is we're seeing SD-WAN actually get remote access thrown into it. Because they've got a cloud platform, you VPN into the cloud, and then they link you back to where you need to be in the branch network. Well, if the branch network happens to be where your private data center is, or if you want to get access into your public cloud infrastructure, it does all that too. And then the next step from remote access then is campus and wireless, because then you can just put all that technology straight into the edge, and now you've got a zero trust boundary. You've got your Google Beyond type project, and that's all SD-WAN, right? So that is not, that to me is already in sight and will probably be here, gut feel, another 5 years, right? If SD-WAN can go from where it was in 2014 to where we are now in 2019, there's no reason not to believe that by 2024, there'll be no campus, no wireless, no branch network. That will all be paved over into one software-defined thing. And now that'll be the early adopters and that'll be the new generation of products. It won't be widespread, right? But that to me is like that strategy. You could put that into a 10-year strategy now and bank on it, in my opinion. Right? Let's look at Contrail, right? Look at Contrail was originally just for the data center, and now it's for the WAN, and now it's got analytics and it does troubleshooting and security, right? It's good as SD-WAN. So why would it not do the campus and the wireless as well from a single controller? Maybe the data center takes a while to catch up because it's got a lot of federation going on. It was the first product to reach market, and it's got a lot of federation going on horizontally and vertically. So it'll take a while for that. But if we can get the software-defined WAN, campus, branch, Wi-Fi all into one thing, certainly this is where Arista's headed with their approach, right? They're just going to unify it all into one product and just say,
Yeah, it seems inevitable. But to bring it back to automation before the end of the show, all of this, even if you have one thing though, and this again, we're still talking just about the network. We're still going to have multiple APIs we have to interface with, and we're still going to have to do some kind of automation on that end. And there's one thing I've seen. All of this is making everyone a generalist in general. A generalist in general. I mean, across the population, right? I mean, I see more and more. Just look at what happened, and in a way, Cisco Cisco might have when they came out with AC or with UCS,
Yeah.
I felt like, wow, network engineers they already do these things. They already do a lot of these things. They're like in a lot of places they're the last people that you escalate to, even if it's not in their domain. You escalate to them, and right away we were seeing this generalization of what network engineers do starting to happen with UCS, and now it seems like it's spreading, right? More and more. And in the end, it might be network engineers. You said you wrote in your article recently that it didn't seem like automation would be a full-time job for network engineers. I would argue, based on for instance, what we talked about this episode, I think we might end up being the generalist who, as a full-time job, do automation, and we might have a lineage back into networking, but at some point, when do we stop saying we're network engineers and start saying that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So let me try a metaphor there. Let's say you're a writer and you're using an app like Microsoft Word to do the writing, okay, for you. It's a tool to help you get going. Now, I would maintain that Microsoft Word is a tool that only idiots would use because it's awful. But let's just, let's pretend it's actually moderately competent. If you're a writer,
you're
need
speaking
to know...
very ambiguously, man. Why don't you clarify what you mean? Be very clear about that.
Just get it. Just be forward.
But if you're writing, 60,000 words as a writer on a novel in Microsoft Word, you need to know something about Microsoft Word to be a successful writer. You need to understand your tooling well enough. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be an expert at Microsoft Word to be able to do that. But there's a very big difference between a writer writing in 60,000 words and somebody who writes, 10 letters a day that's a page each and prints them out and posts them off. So the question that you need to make your decision about is, how much do I need to know my tool to get my job done? And for some people, that is going to be, I sit down in front of the SDN platform, I configure the clickies, and I go and do this and this and this. And for other people, it's going to be Python, Ansible frameworks, Terraform, and writing the customizations that I need for my organization, because that's what they hired me to do. And the question that you need to decide is, what are you? Are you the person who pulls levers on the production line, or are you the person who designs the production line? And that ultimately, to me, is automation your full-time job? I think for most people, it won't be. I think they'll be inside an SDN environment and just doing what they do. But there'll be a certain group of people for whom automation is nearly a full-time job, but it won't be them writing Python code. It'll be doing something on top of some SDN tooling that lets them get stuff done. And that was what my point is with that article, is that SDN platforms avoid automation. They do the automation for you. And in fact,
within a single domain.
Yeah, but my point would be is that over time there'll only be one domain. But they do a lot of work for you, so you don't have to, right? Instead of relying on a framework, you just pull the SDN controller in as a tool, as part of your tool chain. Why wouldn't you do that if it's going to do it better than you can?
I agree with the last part of that for sure. I just the nature so this might not be a perfect analogy, but like the idea of Jevons paradox, right? The more efficient a system becomes, the higher the efficiency of the utilization of those resources become, right? And we saw this with virtualization. Like every time a new technology comes out, we start to use that technology that much more. That's why there's like a billion abandoned VMs in public cloud right now that are costing our companies a lot of money, because we just use this stuff a lot more than we do. And it's really hard when you're not there yet. Like imagine the people who back to your analogy of creating swords, right?
Yeah.
Like it was so difficult just to get to that one technological innovation to make a sword, right? Like eventually that technology tree builds up over the decades and centuries to become a space shuttle. But like you can't see that when you're making swords, right. You know what I mean? So like the thing here is like, don't get wrapped around this, the manifestation of those skill sets. Like if you think that your destiny is to make swords, you're going to have a bad time. Rather focus on the way that you approach problems and creatively solve those problems. and as you move up the technology tree, so to speak, in gaming parlance, you're gonna find more uses for that. It's just inevitable. It's happened over centuries.
Yeah, my point is, don't get hooked up on your favorite Python framework. Start thinking about an SDN controller as a framework, as a tool to be used in the chain, so that when you're writing that automation for your business, make sure you're using the right tool for the job. Maybe it's an axe, maybe it's a handsaw, maybe it's a chainsaw, and make sure you're thinking flexibly about it. Maybe it's the right decision for your business to go and spend $750,000 on an SDN controller with a per device license. Maybe it isn't. Maybe hand carving it all from nothing is the right way to go. I can't answer that question. But I can tell you that, just to go off topic here, go off piste, Viking swords in the 16th century, the 16th and 17th century, they used to make them out of a thing called Eastern steel. And this was a special type of steel that used to come out of northern India, which was in Asia at the time. And there were merchants who would usually bring these steel ingots, because making steel was incredibly difficult to do in that time. And they would actually bring these ingots all the way out from Asia, all the way up to the Icelandic countries, where they would then forge them into swords that they wanted. I mean, that's where we are with SDN controllers at the moment. The SDN controller to me is the steel. And you've then, as an engineer, you've got to forge that into a tool that solves the problems for the business that you have. And the good part about SDN is you'll spend less time trying to do a slice through an array to get the data that you want, or writing a SQL query, or whatever your particular torment is, and spend more time talking to the business. And here's a secret: the more time you spend talking to the business, the more you're appreciated and valued, and you get a pay rise.
And the more work you're going to get.
Well, that's your problem, right?
No, true. That's and that's exactly what I'm saying. That's the whole point. That's a good thing, because the more valuable you are, obviously the pay rise I think comes with that. But in general, like, that's kind of my point. Like, if you, like, right now we're taking on the job of mining the iron ore, right? That's what we're doing right now. That doesn't mean that once you solve the problem of automating that, like say you get into an SDN controller and that does the iron mining for you, right? That doesn't mean that you no longer need to use that portion of your brain. You are, we as engineers aren't static entities. We're not just replaced by that. What we do is we move up the stack, and we use those same skills. We're going to continue to write Python. We're going to continue to use tools like Ansible, maybe a different tool, but that same mindset of building versus just buying and putting something in place will still be there. It'll just be moved up the stack.
I never got paid to configure a Cisco router. I got paid to connect a branch office to the head office.
Yeah. And the nature of what that means to you will change over years, but the role of you rendering what your organization is trying to accomplish into technical terms will never change.
No.
All right, we're gonna wrap up. We're at the top of the hour. Thank you. Well, actually, you know what? Before we do that, I want to give Greg the last word. Greg, the last word. So
learn business. So I guess I
learn
think
business.
about,
and you can be a middle manager.
Well, the problem is you're probably smarter than your middle manager, and that's the lesson that I've learned over the years. Is that generically, I'm smarter than my middle manager. The only difference between them and me is that they focus on the business, and the business is where the money is, right? And where the recognition system. Now, I didn't go to work because I love to work. I went to work to make money so I didn't have to go to work, right? And so my goal has always been to get paid for the least amount of work possible, which is not something that's very intuitive to a lot of people. There are certain periods in my life where I got way too focused on the bits and pieces and the gears and the cogs and all that sort of stuff. But when I took time to pull back and focus on how do I make more money out of this, and started to get really cunning and evil about it, the answer was I learned business skills and I got smarter than my manager. And then all of a sudden I got paid so much more money, like it rained out of the sky. And that's the advice I want to give you, is learn enough business to be DevOps and NetOps, but do the thing that it gives you satisfaction, which is probably the engineering, and find a balance between the two. That's my last word.
Nice. Thank you, Greg. And thank you for coming on the show today. This has been a great conversation. I liked it, and I hope you come back on again in the future.
What a pleasure. It's good to chat to you guys again. It's been so long. Really
yes.
has.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate the time.
All right, everyone. Thank you for watching. We will have this posted on our YouTube channel by the end of the day. But we'll probably use the Zoom recording again based on the audio issues we had earlier. I am Cloudtoad at CLOUDTOAD, just as it sounds, on Twitter. And this is our co-host Matt at MIERDIN, which every single show I choke on that. Mirrodin. Please follow him. Of course, follow NRE Labs at NRE Labs on Twitter. And you can follow Greg on Twitter. He's quite prolific. He creates quite a bit of content to read, to watch. He gets into fun arguments on social media, which are always entertaining. He's Ethereal Mind, ETHEREALMIND. And we'll put links to all this of course, in the description and on the YouTube channel. So again, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Ciao.